When 52-year-old mechanic Daniel Rogers accepted a seemingly impossible bet in Oakwood, Kentucky, nobody knew he possessed a photographic memory so extraordinary he could reconstruct any engine from pure recall alone, a gift born from the tragic car accident that claimed his wife Grace 5 years earlier. What started as cocky young Tony Miller challenging the town's mechanics to rebuild a 1967 Shelby GT500 engine without manuals or references quickly became the most talked about event in Oakwood's history, drawing crowds, journalists, and eventually the attention of mysterious collector Gregory Allen. By sunset the next day, Daniel had gone from a struggling single father, worried about his daughter Amy's college tuition, to a man offered $1 million position that would change everything. This is the extraordinary story of how hidden talent, tragedy, and an impossible challenge converged to create a life-changing moment that proved sometimes the most remarkable abilities are forged in our darkest hours. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked asphalt of Benedetto's auto shop as Daniel Rogers pulled his weathered Ford pickup into the familiar parking space beside the building. At 52, his hands showed the permanent stains of motor oil and calluses that spoke of 3 decades working with engines. The shop itself reflected the economic struggles of Oakwood, Kentucky, a town that had seen better days when the manufacturing plant still operated at full capacity. Daniel stepped out of his truck, wincing slightly as his back protested the movement. The long hours bent over engine bays were taking their toll, but he couldn't afford to slow down, not with Amy's second year of pre-med starting in just 2 months and the tuition bill sitting unopened on his kitchen table. "Morning, Danny boy." Sal Benedetto emerged from the shop's office, coffee mug in hand, and a warm smile creasing his weathered Italian features. At 68, Sal had owned the garage for 43 years, hiring Daniel fresh out of high school, when other shops wouldn't take a chance on an untested kid. "Morning, Sal. That transmission from the Henderson job ready to go back in?" "Should be. Danny Martinez got it buttoned up yesterday afternoon. Kid's got good hands." Sal sipped his coffee, studying Daniel's face with the concern of someone who'd watched him struggle through the worst period of his life. "You look tired. Amy keeping you up with college prep?" Daniel shrugged, grabbing his toolbox from the truck bed. The weight felt heavier these days, though he'd never admit it. Just the usual worries: medical school applications, MCAT prep, finances. That girl's got brains like her mother. She'll make it. The mention of Grace brought the familiar tightness to Daniel's chest. 5 years since the accident, and certain conversations still felt like reopening wounds. "Yeah, she will. Just need to make sure I can cover my end of the bargain." The shop's main bay housed a 2018 Honda Civic with transmission problems, while Bay 2 held Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick that refused to stay aligned. Steady work, but nothing that would significantly dent Amy's tuition costs. Daniel had run the numbers countless times, lying awake at night calculating overtime hours against mounting bills. Danny Martinez looked up from the Honda as Daniel approached. At 22, Danny represented the new generation of mechanics, trained on computer diagnostics and comfortable with the electronic systems that sometimes baffled older technicians. But he respected Daniel's intuitive understanding of mechanical systems, often seeking his opinion on difficult problems. "Mr. Rogers, this transmission's giving me grief. Everything checks out on the diagnostic, but something's not right with the shift pattern." Daniel set down his toolbox and listened as Danny started the engine. Within seconds, he detected the subtle irregularity in the transmission's operation, a slight hesitation that the diagnostic computer couldn't identify. Torque converters not locking up properly. Probably a solenoid issue, but check the valve body first. Sometimes debris gets caught in the passages. Danny's face lit up with understanding. I never would have caught that from the sound alone. Experience. You'll get there. The morning progressed with routine maintenance and minor repairs. Daniel found comfort in the predictable nature of mechanical problems. Unlike life's complexities, engines followed logical patterns. If you understood the fundamentals, you could diagnose and fix almost anything. Around 10:30, the familiar rumble of a modified exhaust announced Tony Miller's arrival. Tony owned a small garage across town that catered to younger customers wanting performance modifications and custom work. At 28, he'd built a reputation for flashy builds and an even flashier personality. Tony's bright red Camaro SS pulled into the lot with unnecessary drama, the supercharged engine announcing his presence to the entire neighborhood. He stepped out wearing pristine work clothes that suggested more time spent talking about cars than actually working on them. "Sal, Danny boy." Tony nodded to each man with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never struggled to pay bills. "Heard you guys are working on some boring grocery getter transmissions. Maybe it's time to upgrade your clientele." Sal's expression tightened. He'd tolerated Tony's attitude for years, recognizing him as competition, but finding his methods distasteful. "We take care of this community, Tony. Real people with real needs. Real people need real performance. Speaking of which, I just picked up something you old-timers might find interesting." Tony walked to his car's trunk and began removing items with theatrical flair. First came a comprehensive technical manual, thick with detailed diagrams and specifications. Then several smaller manuals and reference guides. Finally, he revealed what appeared to be engine components wrapped in protective cloth. Complete 1967 Shelby GT500 428 Cobra jet engine. Every piece from the block to the last gasket, original factory specifications. Tony's grin widened as he saw Daniel's involuntary interest. Picked it up from an estate sale. Previous owner had it fully disassembled for restoration before he passed. Daniel approached the components, despite himself. The 428 Cobra jet represented the pinnacle of American muscle car engineering, a power plant capable of producing over 400 horsepower in an era when manufacturers underrated their engines for insurance purposes. Even disassembled, the parts commanded respect. "Beautiful pieces," Daniel admitted, examining the forged steel crankshaft. "Don't see many of these anymore." "That's exactly what I thought," which gave me an interesting idea. Tony's voice took on the tone of someone about to deliver a punchline. "I'm thinking of hosting a little competition. See who among Oakwood's so-called master mechanics can actually put this baby back together." Sal snorted. "With the manual sitting right there? Not much of a challenge." Tony's grin became predatory. "That's where it gets interesting, old man. No manuals, no reference materials, no computer diagnostics, nothing but pure mechanical knowledge and experience. Just you, the parts, and whatever you've got stored up here." He tapped his temple with exaggerated emphasis. The shop fell silent except for the distant hum of the air compressor. Daniel felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of interest and apprehension. The challenge appealed to the part of him that had always been drawn to complex mechanical puzzles. But accepting would mean public attention he'd spent years avoiding. "You're talking about a complete engine rebuild from memory alone?" Danny asked, voice filled with awe and skepticism. "Complete rebuild. Every component in its proper place, every specification correct, every torque setting precise. First person. To successfully complete the assembly wins bragging rights and a nice little pot we'll put together from entry fees." Sal shook his head dismissively. "That's not a competition, it's a stunt. Modern engines are complex enough with all the documentation available. Trying to rebuild a classic performance engine from memory alone, you're asking for trouble. Maybe for some people. Tony's eyes found Daniel's. But I hear tell there are mechanics in this town who claim to know engines inside and out. Seems like a perfect opportunity to prove it. The challenge hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Daniel felt the weight of expectation from the younger mechanics who'd gathered to watch the exchange. In a small town, reputations were built on moments like these, and Tony had deliberately crafted a situation designed to embarrass anyone foolish enough to accept. "What kind of entry fee are we talking about?" Daniel heard himself ask, immediately regretting the words. Tony's smile became triumphant. $500 per person. Winner takes the pot, plus whatever side bets people want to make. Should be enough to make things interesting. $500, nearly a quarter of what Daniel had managed to save toward Amy's tuition. The responsible part of his mind screamed warnings about gambling with money he couldn't afford to lose, but another part, the part that remembered what it felt like to be recognized for exceptional ability, whispered different counsel. "When and where?" Daniel asked quietly. Sal grabbed his arm. "Danny, don't be stupid. This is exactly what he wants. You've got nothing to prove to this kid. Next Saturday, 1 week from today, we'll set up at the community college shop classroom. Neutral ground, plenty of space, and Dr. Bennett can supervise to make sure everything's legitimate." Dr. Michael Bennett taught automotive engineering at Oakwood Community College and maintained a reputation for fairness and technical expertise. His involvement would lend credibility to what might otherwise seem like a publicity stunt. Dr. Bennett's agreed to this, Sal asked skeptically. He's interested in the educational value, said it would be a good demonstration of practical versus theoretical knowledge for his students. Daniel weighed the implications. The money represented a significant risk, but success could provide both financial help and professional validation. More importantly, the challenge appealed to abilities he'd kept hidden for years, talents developed through necessity and refined through private study. "I'll need to think about it," Daniel said finally. "Fair enough, but don't take too long. Word's already getting around town, and I expect several participants." Tony began rewrapping the engine components. Should be quite a show, might even attract some outside attention. You know how people love to see small-town mechanics try to play in the big leagues. The implied insult wasn't lost on anyone present. Tony had a gift for making challenges sound like foregone conclusions, always positioning himself as the professional among amateurs. As Tony loaded his car and prepared to leave, he turned back with an afterthought. "Oh, and Danny, bring cash. No checks, no credit cards. This is a man's bet, settled like men settle things." The Camaro's departure left an uncomfortable silence in its wake. Daniel stood staring at the empty parking space, his mind already visualizing the complexity of a complete engine assembly. Every component had to fit precisely, every clearance had to be exact, every torque specification had to be perfect. "You're not seriously considering this," Sal said, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. $500 would help with Amy's expenses. $500 lost would hurt a lot more than it would help. Danny Martinez looked between the two men, sensing the deeper currents of the conversation. "Mr. Rogers, do you really think it's possible, rebuilding an entire engine from memory?" Daniel met the young man's curious gaze. How could he explain that he'd been carrying detailed images of hundreds of engines in his mind for years, that he could visualize every component of the 428 Cobra jet down to individual bolt patterns and gasket configurations, that his memory had become both blessing and curse, preserving technical details with photographic precision, while also holding on to painful memories he'd rather forget? "Depends on how well you know the engine," Daniel said simply. The rest of the day passed. With routine work, But Daniel's thoughts kept returning to Tony's challenge. By closing time, word had spread through Oakwood's small automotive community. 3 other mechanics had reportedly accepted the challenge, and speculation was building about potential outcomes. As Daniel prepared to leave, Sal approached with the expression of someone who'd been wrestling with difficult thoughts. "Danny, I've known you for over 30 years, watched you work through problems that stumped mechanics twice your age. But this feels different. This feels personal." "Maybe it is. That boy's trying to humiliate you, make a show of your struggle." For his own entertainment, Daniel considered this assessment. Tony Miller represented everything he disliked about the modern automotive culture. Flash over substance, marketing over craftsmanship, ego over expertise. But the challenge itself transcended Tony's motives. "What if I can do it, Sal? What if I can actually rebuild that engine from memory alone?" Sal studied his friend's face, seeing something there he hadn't observed in years. A spark of confidence, a glimmer of the exceptional mechanic he'd always known Daniel to be. "Then you'd better start preparing, because if you're going to do this, you're going to do it right." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table staring at the stack of bills that seemed to multiply regardless of how many hours he worked. The tired, small apartment above Henderson's Bakery had been home for 3 years, ever since he'd sold the house to pay Grace's medical expenses. The aroma of tomorrow's bread drifted up through the floorboards, a constant reminder of simpler times when such smells meant comfort rather than the proximity forced by financial necessity. Amy burst through the front door with her characteristic energy, arms loaded with textbooks and the laptop she'd bought second-hand for her studies. At 19, she possessed Grace's determined spirit and quick mind, combined with Daniel's methodical approach to problems. Her pre-med coursework demanded 16-hour study days, yet she still found time to work weekends at the campus bookstore. "Dad, you look like someone stole your favorite wrench." She dropped her books on the counter and immediately began assessing his mood with the perceptiveness that made her an excellent student. What happened today? Daniel pushed the bills aside, not wanting to burden her with financial worries she couldn't solve. Tony Miller stopped by the shop with some kind of challenge, wants to see who can rebuild an engine from memory alone. Amy's eyes lit up with interest as she poured herself a glass of water. "Like a competition. That sounds right up your alley. You know more about engines than anyone in 3 counties. It's not that simple. There's an entry fee, and the engine is a 1967 Shelby GT500, complex piece of machinery with specifications most people would need manuals to reference. But not you." Amy settled into the chair across from him, her expression growing serious. "Dad, I've watched you diagnose problems that stumped other mechanics just by listening to engines run. You remember details about cars you worked on years ago. This isn't about most people." Daniel felt the familiar weight of unspoken truth. Amy knew he possessed exceptional memory capabilities, but she'd never understood the full extent of his abilities. How could he explain that he could visualize every component of that Shelby engine with perfect clarity? That he'd spent countless hours studying technical manuals and specifications, not just for practical purposes, but as a way to occupy his mind during the darkest period of his life. "The entry fee is $500, he said quietly. Amy's expression sobered instantly. She understood their financial situation better than he wished, having grown up watching him work extra shifts and skip meals to ensure her needs were met. "That's a lot of money for us. Too much to risk on what might be a fool's errand." Amy studied her father's face, seeing something beyond his practical concerns. "But you want to do it. I can tell." Daniel stood and walked to the window overlooking Main Street, Oakwood's downtown, showed signs of economic decline that mirrored their personal struggles. Empty storefronts punctuated the row of businesses that had survived the latest recession, while the new strip mall on the highway drew customers away from family-owned establishments. Your mother always said I was too cautious, that I let opportunities pass because I was afraid of failing. Mom also said you were the most capable person she'd ever known, that you could fix anything if you set your mind to it. The mention of Grace's confidence in his abilities brought both comfort and pain. She'd believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself, pushing him to pursue opportunities he might otherwise have avoided. "Tell me about the accident again," Amy said softly. Daniel tensed. They discussed Grace's death countless times over the years, but Amy's recent psychology courses had made her more perceptive about the emotional undercurrents he tried to hide. "Amy, we've been through this, not the facts. I know the facts. Tell me about what happened to you afterward, about how you changed." Daniel returned to his chair, recognizing his daughter's determination to understand. She'd inherited Grace's ability to probe gently but persistently until she reached the truth. "The first few months were difficult. I couldn't focus at work. Couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except the details of that night. The accident had occurred on a rainy November evening 5 years earlier. Grace had been driving home from her nursing shift at the county hospital when a drunk driver ran a red light at the intersection of Oak and Main. The impact had been devastating, killing Grace instantly and critically injuring the other driver's family. I started reading everything I could find about the accident: police reports, medical examiners' findings, insurance investigations. I needed to understand exactly what had happened, every detail, every factor that contributed to the outcome. Amy waited patiently, understanding that these revelations required careful timing. Then I started reading medical journals, trying to understand her injuries, the trauma procedures the hospital had attempted. I wanted to know if there was anything that could have been done differently. What Daniel didn't mention was how his grief had evolved into an obsessive need to understand every technical detail he encountered. Medical procedures, trauma protocols, automotive safety systems, accident reconstruction techniques. His mind had become a repository for information, storing details with photographic precision as a way to maintain control in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable. The reading helped at first, but then I realized I was remembering everything perfectly. Not just the general concepts, but exact quotes, specific diagrams, precise measurements. I could recall entire pages of technical specifications without effort. Amy leaned forward, fascinated, like a photographic memory. More than that, it was as if my brain had rewired itself to capture and preserve information with perfect fidelity. I started testing it, memorizing repair manuals and engine specifications. Within months, I could visualize complete technical systems in my mind. "Dad, that's incredible. Why haven't you ever talked about this?" Daniel struggled to articulate the complex emotions surrounding his enhanced memory. "Because it felt wrong. To benefit from something that came from losing your mother, like I was profiting from tragedy." Amy reached across the table and took his hand. "Mom would want you to use every advantage you have. She'd want you to help people with your abilities, not hide them." "I do help people, every day at the shop, but not like you could, not like this competition would let you." Daniel considered. Her words, the Shelby Engine Challenge, represented more than a chance to win money. It was an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities he'd kept hidden, to show what intuitive understanding combined with perfect recall could accomplish. "Even if I could rebuild the engine perfectly, Tony Miller's not going to make it easy. He's planning this as entertainment, probably expecting most participants to fail publicly." "Then don't give him that satisfaction. Show everyone what real, Expertise looks like. Before Daniel could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Amy answered to find Lauren Parker, a woman in her late 30s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to asking difficult questions. "Mr. Rogers, I'm Lauren Parker from Automotive Weekly magazine. I understand you're considering participating in an unusual competition this weekend." Daniel stood slowly, wondering how word had traveled so quickly beyond Oakwood's borders. News travels fast. Small-town mechanical competitions aren't usually my beat, but a colleague mentioned something about rebuilding a Shelby engine from memory alone. That's the kind of story that gets attention in automotive circles. Lauren's presence suggested the challenge had attracted interest beyond local participants. Daniel invited her inside, noting her professional demeanor and the recording device. She produced from her briefcase. "I'm researching a piece about traditional craftsmanship versus modern technology. The idea of mechanics who can work without computer diagnostics or technical manuals fits perfectly with my thesis, which is that we're losing fundamental skills in favor of technological dependence, that mechanics like you represent a dying breed of craftsmen who understand machines intuitively." Amy excused herself to study, but Daniel caught her encouraging smile as she gathered her books. Lauren settled at the kitchen table, establishing the easy rapport of an experienced interviewer. "Tell me about your background, Mr. Rogers. How long have you been working on engines?" For the next hour, Daniel found himself sharing stories he rarely discussed. His early apprenticeship with Sal Benedetto, the satisfaction of solving complex mechanical problems, the evolution of automotive technology over 3 decades. Lauren asked perceptive questions that demonstrated genuine understanding of mechanical systems. "What made you consider this particular challenge? Rebuilding a performance engine from memory seems extraordinarily difficult." Daniel chose his words carefully, unwilling to reveal the full extent of his abilities to someone who might sensationalize them. "Experience teaches you to see patterns. Once you understand the fundamental principles, specific engines become variations on familiar themes. But the 428 Cobra Jet isn't just any engine. It's one of the most complex performance power plants of its era. Complex but logical, Ford's engineers designed it for maximum power within specific constraints. Understanding their priorities helps predict their solutions." Lauren made notes as they talked, occasionally asking for clarification on technical points. Her questions revealed extensive research into both the specific engine and the broader competition. "I've spoken with Dr. Bennett about supervising the event. He mentioned that several experienced mechanics have entered, but he seems particularly interested in your participation." "Dr. Bennett knows my work. He said you'd solved several problems for his students over the years. Apparently, you have a reputation for seeing solutions others miss." Daniel felt a flush of pride at the recognition, followed immediately by apprehension. "About increased attention. I just approach problems methodically. Methodically enough to rebuild a complete engine without references?" The direct question hung in the air between them. Daniel realized that his answer would likely determine whether Lauren's article portrayed him as confident professional or reckless amateur. "I believe so, yes." Lauren smiled, apparently satisfied with his response. "That kind of confidence is exactly what makes this story interesting. Mind if I follow up with some technical questions about the engine itself?" For the next 30 minutes, Lauren tested Daniel's knowledge of the 428 Cobra Jet specifications. Compression ratios, camshaft timing, carburetor configurations, ignition systems. Daniel answered each question precisely, drawing on the detailed information stored in his enhanced memory. "Impressive," Lauren said finally. "Most mechanics would need reference materials for that level of detail." "Experience," Daniel repeated, though he could see the journalist's skeptical interest. After Lauren left with promises to attend Saturday's competition, Daniel found Amy waiting in the living room with her textbooks. She seemed nice, also seemed like she thinks you're going to do something remarkable this weekend. If I decide to participate. Amy set aside her biology notes and fixed him with the direct gaze she'd inherited from her mother. Dad, you're going to do this. We both know it. The question is whether you're going to do it confidently or spend the next week worrying about failure. Daniel sank into his worn recliner, feeling the weight of decision settling around him. The money represents a real risk, Amy. If I lose that $500, it affects your tuition, our rent, everything. And if I win, it helps. But winning requires beating at least 3 other experienced mechanics in front of a crowd that includes journalists and college professors. Amy closed her textbook and moved to sit on the arm of his chair. Remember when I was 12 and wanted to try out for the debate team? You told me that being afraid of failure was just another way of choosing to fail. Daniel smiled at the memory. Amy had not only made the debate team, but had led them to the state championships 2 years running. That was different. You were competing with kids your own age. This is you competing with your peers, mechanics who've worked on engines for decades, just like you have. The only difference is what you carry up here. She tapped his temple gently. And what you carry is something special. Your mother used to say that. Because it's true. Dad, I've watched you fix things that seemed impossible. I've seen other mechanics bring you problems they couldn't solve. This competition isn't about proving anything to Tony Miller or impressing journalists. It's about using the abilities Mom's death somehow gave you to create opportunities for our future. Daniel felt the emotional barriers he'd maintained around his enhanced memory beginning to shift. For 5 years, he'd viewed his perfect recall as a burden born from tragedy. But Amy was suggesting a different perspective, that Grace's death had revealed capabilities that could honor her memory through their practical application. If I do this, I do it completely. No half measures, no excuses if things don't work out. Amy's smile lit up her entire face. That's the dad I remember. The one who never backed down from a challenge when it mattered. Then I guess I'd better start preparing. Saturday's only 5 days away. What kind of preparation do you need for a perfect memory? Daniel considered the question seriously. Practice visualizing the assembly sequence. Review the specific torque, specifications and clearances. Make sure I can recall every detail under pressure. Sounds like you're going to win this thing? Sounds like I'm going to try. Friday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for October in Kentucky, bringing with it a nervous energy that seemed to permeate every corner of Oakwood. Daniel had spent the week in careful preparation, using quiet moments at the shop to mentally rehearse the Shelby engine assembly sequence. Each night, he'd sit in his recliner with his eyes closed, visualizing components and their relationships in perfect detail, testing his recall against the comprehensive images stored in his enhanced memory. The preparation ritual had become almost meditative. Daniel would begin with the engine block, mentally examining every surface, every bolt hole, every machined passage. Then he'd add components systematically: crankshaft, pistons, connecting rods, cylinder heads, valve train, intake manifold, exhaust manifolds, carburetor, ignition system, and dozens of smaller parts that collectively transformed metal into mechanical. Symphony, Amy, sat at the kitchen table grading practice MCAT questions, occasionally glancing up to watch her father's preparation routine. She'd learned not to interrupt these sessions, recognizing them as both technical review and emotional. Centering, "How many people do you think will show up tomorrow?" she asked during one of his breaks. Daniel opened his eyes and stretched, working out the tension that built in his neck during intense concentration. Hard to say. Word's gotten around pretty thoroughly. Sal mentioned that people have been calling the shop all week asking for details. Are you nervous? The question deserved honest consideration. Daniel felt a complex mixture of anticipation, confidence, and underlying anxiety about performing under public scrutiny. About the engine? No. About everything else? Definitely. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Daniel opened it to find Dr. Michael Bennett standing in the hallway, looking somewhat awkward in casual clothes rather than his usual professorial attire. "Mr. Rogers, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to discuss tomorrow's event and make sure you understood the ground rules." Daniel invited him inside, noting the professor's careful assessment of their modest living space. At 45, Dr. Bennett carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to academic authority, but his manner suggested genuine respect for practical expertise. "Dr. Bennett, this is my daughter Amy." Amy, Dr. Bennett teaches automotive engineering at the community college. Amy stood to shake hands, immediately launching into questions about the engineering program. "I'm pre-med now, but I've always been fascinated by mechanical systems. Dad's taught me quite a bit over the years. Your father has an excellent reputation. Among my students, several have mentioned learning more from brief conversations with him than from entire textbook chapters." Daniel felt a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. Just different ways of looking at problems. Dr. Bennett settled at the kitchen table, producing a folder of official-looking documents. "I wanted to review the competition rules to ensure fairness for all participants. We've had some additional interest since word spread beyond Oakwood." "How much additional interest?" Amy asked. 3 mechanics from neighboring counties have entered, plus 1 from Louisville, who apparently specializes in classic muscle cars. The pot has grown to over $4,000. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The increased stakes changed everything, transforming a local challenge into a regional competition with serious financial implications. "That's a significant amount of money," he said carefully. "It is, which is why I want to emphasize the strict parameters we've established. No reference materials of any kind will be permitted in the work area. No cell phones, no computers, no consultation with spectators. Each participant will work independently with only basic hand tools provided." Dr. Bennett spread diagrams across the table showing the college shop's layout. "We've set up 4 separate workstations, each with identical tool sets and adequate lighting. The engine components will be presented in randomized order to prevent anyone from gaining advantage through preparation sequence." Amy leaned forward to examine the diagrams. "How long do participants have to complete the assembly?" "No time limit, but we expect most attempts to require between 6 and 10 hours. We'll start at 8 a.m. and continue until everyone either completes or concedes." The mention of potential failure brought Daniel's anxieties into sharp focus. Public concession would be professionally humiliating, particularly with journalists present to document the event. "What happens if someone makes an error during assembly?" Daniel asked. "That depends on the severity. Minor mistakes that don't affect engine function might be overlooked, but incorrect component placement or improper torque specifications would likely prevent successful completion." Dr. Bennett's tone suggested he expected most participants to struggle with the challenge's complexity. "I should mention that I've researched the 428 Cobra jet extensively in preparation for supervising. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated engine with numerous variations depending on production year and application. Getting everything exactly right requires extensive knowledge." "Have you shared that research with the other participants?" Amy asked pointedly. "Of course not. My role is to verify correct assembly, not to provide assistance." Daniel appreciated Dr. Bennett's commitment to fairness, but wondered if the professor understood the true scope of what he was attempting. Rebuilding any engine from memory required comprehensive knowledge of hundreds of components and their relationships. The 428 Cobra jet added layers of complexity that would challenge even experienced mechanics with full documentation. Dr. Bennett, can I ask why you agreed to supervise this event? It seems outside your usual academic responsibilities. The professor considered the question thoughtfully. Honestly, because I'm curious about the intersection of theoretical knowledge and practical expertise. My students learn principles and procedures, but they rarely see those concepts applied by someone with decades of hands-on experience. You think academic training isn't sufficient? I think academic training is essential, but incomplete. Real mastery requires something textbooks can't provide: intuitive understanding developed through years of problem solving. Amy smiled at this validation of her father's abilities. That's exactly what Dad always says, that engines have personalities and you have to learn to listen to them. Dr. Bennett nodded approvingly. Precisely. Which brings me to another point, Mr. Rogers. I understand you've developed some unconventional diagnostic techniques over the years. Students have mentioned your ability to identify problems through sound analysis and other sensory methods. Daniel tensed, uncertain how much he wanted to reveal about his enhanced capabilities. Experience teaches you to notice patterns. I'm sure it does. I'm hoping tomorrow's demonstration will help my students understand the value of that experiential learning. After Dr. Bennett left with final reminders about reporting time and procedures, Daniel found himself facing the reality of heightened expectations. The professor clearly viewed him as a representative of traditional craftsmanship, while participants and spectators would be looking for either vindication or failure of old-school methods. You're overthinking this, Amy observed, watching his expression. Dr. Bennett believes in you, the journalists believe in you, even Tony Miller believes in you, or he wouldn't have created this challenge specifically to test your abilities. Tony created this challenge to embarrass me, maybe initially, but look how it's evolved. Regional participants, significant prize money, academic supervision, media coverage. This stopped being about Tony's ego days ago. Daniel walked to the window, watching evening settle over Oakwood's quiet streets. Tomorrow would bring attention he'd avoided for years, putting his hidden abilities on display for evaluation by peers and strangers alike. What if I fail? What if my memory isn't as reliable under pressure as I think it is? Amy joined him at the window, slipping her arm around his waist in a gesture that reminded him powerfully of Grace. Then you fail, attempting something extraordinary. There's no shame in that. There's $500 of shame we can't afford. Dad, win or lose, this competition changes how people see you. Dr. Bennett's students will remember the mechanic who was confident enough to try something impossible. Other professionals will know your name. That kind of recognition creates opportunities, or it creates a reputation for poor judgment. Amy turned to face him directly, her expression serious. Do you remember what you told me before my first debate competition? When I was terrified of looking stupid in front of the whole school, Daniel smiled slightly, recalling the conversation. That being afraid of looking stupid was the best way to guarantee you'd act stupid. Exactly. And what else? That confidence isn't about knowing you'll succeed. It's about believing your preparation gives you the best possible chance. So the question isn't whether you might fail. The question is whether you're prepared. Daniel considered his week of mental rehearsal, the countless hours he'd spent visualizing the engine assembly in perfect detail. His enhanced memory had catalogued every specification, every torque setting, every clearance measurement. He could recall the exact positioning of each component and the precise sequence required for proper assembly. I'm prepared, he said finally. Then, trust your preparation. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of October weather that made Kentucky beautiful. Daniel arrived at the community college campus 45 minutes early, wanting to familiarize himself with the work environment before the competition began. The automotive shop buzzed with activity as Dr. Bennett and several students prepared. The workstations. Each area had been meticulously organized with identical tool sets, adequate lighting, and space for component layout. The Shelby engine parts sat in the center of the shop on a large table, covered by a canvas tarp that would remain in place until all participants were ready to begin. "Mr. Rogers, good morning." Dr. Bennett approached with a clipboard and official demeanor. "You're the first to arrive. How are you feeling?" "Ready," Daniel replied, though his stomach churned with nervous energy. "Excellent. Let me show you to your workstation." The assigned area felt both spacious and confining, with enough room to work comfortably, but clear boundaries that emphasized the solitary nature of the challenge. Daniel examined the provided tools, noting their quality and completeness. Everything necessary for engine assembly was present, from basic wrenches to precision measuring instruments. Amy arrived with coffee and moral support, followed closely by Sal Benedetto and several mechanics from the shop. Their presence provided comfort, but also added pressure to perform well in front of people who respected his abilities. "Danny boy, you look like a man about to do something memorable," Sal said with forced cheerfulness that didn't quite mask his concern. "That's the plan." Tony Miller arrived precisely at 7:30 with characteristic flair, parking his Camaro prominently in front of the building. He entered the shop with three companions Daniel didn't recognize, all carrying themselves with the confidence of experienced mechanics. "Danny Rogers," Tony called out with exaggerated friendliness. "Ready to show everyone what small-town expertise looks like?" "Ready to do my best." The other participants began arriving shortly after, each taking time to examine their workstations and assess the competition. Daniel recognized Jake Morrison and Jimmy Murphy from neighboring towns, both solid mechanics with good reputations. The fourth participant, introduced as Rick Caldwell from Louisville, looked younger than expected, but carried himself with professional confidence. As 8 o'clock approached, the shop filled with spectators. Dr. Bennett's students clustered near the work area, clearly excited about witnessing the competition. Local mechanics and auto enthusiasts formed another group, while journalists and curiosity seekers occupied the remaining space. Lauren Parker appeared with a photographer, setting up discreet positions for documenting the event. Her presence reminded Daniel that this competition would be preserved in print, creating a permanent record of either success or failure. "Gentlemen," Dr. Bennett called for attention as the clock reached 8. "Before we begin, let me review the ground rules one final time." The professor's voice carried clearly through the now quiet shop as he outlined the parameters. No reference materials, no outside consultation, no time limit beyond reasonable daylight hours. Each participant would work independently to complete a full engine assembly, with Dr. Bennett serving as final judge of correctness and completeness. The engine you'll be working with is a 1967 Ford 428 Cobra Jet, complete with all original components. Your goal is to achieve proper assembly that would result in a functional engine ready for installation. Dr. Bennett moved to the covered table in the center of the shop. "When I remove this cover, you'll have 5 minutes to examine the components before returning to your workstations. No touching, no moving parts, just visual inspection." Daniel felt his heart rate increase as the moment of truth approached. Around him, the other participants shifted nervously, some stretching their hands, others taking deep breaths to center themselves. "Are you ready, gentlemen?" All voices confirmed readiness, though Daniel noticed varying degrees of confidence in the responses. Dr. Bennett grasped the canvas cover. "Your 5-minute inspection period begins now." The cover came away to reveal hundreds of engine components, arranged in systematic groupings: pistons, connecting rods, valves, springs, gaskets, bolts, and dozens of smaller parts that would need to find their precise positions during assembly. Daniel approached the table with the other participants, but his experience was fundamentally different. Where they saw intimidating complexity, he perceived familiar patterns. His enhanced memory immediately began cataloging each component, comparing observed details with stored specifications, noting any variations or special characteristics that might affect assembly. The 5 minutes passed in concentrated silence, each participant studying the components with intense focus. When Dr. Bennett called time, Daniel felt confident in his initial assessment. Everything appeared to be present and in good condition, with no obvious complications or missing pieces. Gentlemen, return to your workstations. When you're ready, you may begin. Daniel walked back to his assigned area, feeling the weight of dozens of watching eyes. The shop had grown quiet except for the subtle sounds of participants arranging their tools and preparing their workspaces. He closed his eyes, briefly accessing the mental blueprint he'd refined throughout the week. The assembly sequence unfolded in his mind with crystal clarity. Block preparation, crankshaft installation, piston and rod assembly, cylinder head preparation and mounting, camshaft and valve train installation, intake and exhaust manifolds, carburetor and ignition systems. Daniel opened his eyes and looked directly at Dr. Bennett. "I'm ready to begin." The first hour of competition unfolded with methodical precision as 4 experienced mechanics approached the same challenge through distinctly different strategies. Daniel had begun with systematic component retrieval, moving between the central table and his workstation with purposeful efficiency. Each part he selected seemed predetermined, as if he were following an invisible checklist stored entirely in his mind. Jake Morrison from the neighboring county had adopted a more conventional approach, grouping similar components and studying each piece carefully before making placement decisions. His deliberate pace suggested thoroughness, but also uncertainty about optimal assembly sequence. Rick Caldwell, the specialist from Louisville, worked with professional confidence that came from extensive classic car restoration experience. He'd organized his work area into logical sections and was methodically preparing the engine block with the precise movements of someone who'd performed similar tasks countless times. Tony Miller moved with characteristic bravado, making quick decisions and handling components with casual familiarity. However, Daniel noticed subtle hesitations that suggested Tony's confidence might exceed his actual knowledge of this specific engine configuration. "Fascinating to watch different approaches to the same problem," Dr. Bennett murmured to Lauren Parker, who was taking detailed notes while her photographer captured various angles of the work in progress. "Mr. Rogers seems to be working from a different playbook entirely," Lauren observed. "He's not studying components or double-checking anything. It's like he already knows exactly where everything goes." Daniel's enhanced memory had indeed eliminated the need for the careful examination that occupied his competitors. When he approached the parts table, he could instantly identify each component and recall its precise specifications. The crankshafts, journal diameters, the connecting rod-bolt torque values, the valve spring pressures, all existed in perfect detail within his mental database. By 9:30, Daniel had completed the lower-end assembly with fluid efficiency that drew increasingly focused attention from spectators. The crankshaft sat properly in its bearings, pistons and connecting rods were installed with correct orientation, and the oil pump had been mounted with precise alignment. "Dad's moving like he's done this exact engine 100 times, Amy whispered to Sal, who was watching with growing amazement and concern. "Either that, or he's making mistakes so confidently that nobody's noticing yet," Sal replied, though his tone suggested he didn't believe his own cautionary words. The other participants had made solid progress, but were clearly working more deliberately. Jake Morrison was still carefully measuring bearing clearances, while Rick Caldwell had encountered a sequence question that required several minutes of consideration. Tony Miller had achieved respectable pace, but was beginning to show signs of frustration with components that didn't fit together as easily as expected. Dr. Bennett circulated among the workstations, observing techniques and occasionally making notes on his clipboard. When he paused behind Daniel's station, his expression shifted from professional monitoring to genuine fascination. Daniel was installing the cylinder heads with mechanical precision that spoke of absolute certainty about bolt patterns, gasket orientation, and proper torque sequence. His hands moved without hesitation, positioning components with millimeter accuracy that suggested perfect spatial visualization. "Mr. Rogers," Dr. Bennett said quietly, "would you mind explaining your head bolt torque sequence?" Without interrupting his work rhythm, Daniel responded. "Factory specification calls for progressive tightening in 3 stages. Initial torque to 30 foot-pounds in cross pattern, second stage to 60 foot-pounds, final stage to 85 foot-pounds. Critical to maintain proper gasket compression without warping the deck surface." Dr. Bennett made notes, then moved to observe Jake Morrison's approach to the same procedure. The comparison was striking. Where Daniel worked with unconscious confidence, Jake repeatedly consulted the bolt pattern by visual inspection and proceeded with careful deliberation. "This is remarkable documentation of experiential versus analytical approaches," Dr. Bennett told Lauren Parker. "Rogers appears to be working from internalized knowledge that's become automatic, while the others are solving problems step by step." Lauren's article was practically writing itself as she observed the dramatic differences in technique and confidence levels. How unusual is this kind of memory-based assembly? In my 20 years of teaching automotive technology, I've never seen anything comparable. Most master mechanics can work efficiently with familiar engines, but this level of detailed recall without reference materials is extraordinary. The morning progressed, with Daniel maintaining his steady pace, while gaps began emerging between participants. Rick Caldwell had overcome his earlier uncertainty and was making good progress on valve train installation. Jake Morrison continued, his methodical approach producing quality work, but falling behind in overall timing. Tony Miller's initial confidence had given way to visible frustration as several component orientation issues forced him to disassemble and retry portions of his work. Around 10:45, Daniel encountered his first significant decision point. The 428 Cobra Jet's intake manifold required precise installation that involved multiple gasket layers and careful bolt pattern execution. Several spectators who understood the complexity of this step leaned forward with increased attention. Daniel approached the parts table and selected the intake manifold with the same purposeful confidence he'd shown throughout the morning. However, as he returned to his workstation, Amy noticed a subtle change in his demeanor, a slight narrowing of focus that suggested he was accessing deeper levels of his enhanced memory. The manifold installation required perfect alignment of water passages, vacuum fittings, and carburetor mounting surfaces. Daniel positioned the component with surgical precision, then began the complex bolt installation sequence that would determine whether his assembly achieved proper sealing and functionality. "He's not using any sealant on those gasket surfaces," Tony Miller called out, his voice carrying a note of challenge. "That manifold's going to leak without proper preparation." Dr. Bennett looked up from his notes, suddenly alert to potential controversy. "Mr. Miller, please focus on your own work. There will be time for discussion after completion." "I'm just saying some of us understand proper procedures," Tony persisted, loud enough for spectators to hear. Daniel didn't respond verbally, but Amy could see the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated controlled irritation. Her father had never appreciated public challenges to his professional competence, particularly from people he considered less experienced. Sal stepped closer to the work area boundary, ready to defend Daniel if the comments continued. "Danny knows what he's doing," he said firmly. "We'll see about that when they try to start these engines," Tony replied with deliberate provocation. Lauren Parker made notes about the emerging tension between participants, recognizing it as human drama that would enhance her article's narrative appeal. Competition pressure was revealing personality differences that might remain hidden under normal circumstances. Daniel completed the intake manifold installation with methodical precision, then moved immediately to carburetor mounting. The 4-barrel Holly required careful attention to fuel line routing, vacuum connections, and throttle linkage alignment. Again, his movements showed no hesitation or uncertainty. How does he know all this stuff without looking anything up? One of Dr. Bennett's students whispered to another. "Experience," the professor answered, though his tone suggested the explanation felt incomplete even to him. By 11:30, Daniel had achieved remarkable progress toward complete assembly. The engine was beginning to look recognizably functional, with major components properly positioned and secured. His systematic approach had eliminated the backtracking and corrections that were consuming time for other participants. Rick Caldwell remained in second position, working with professional competence, but clearly requiring more deliberation for each decision. Jake Morrison had produced quality work, but was falling further behind the leaders. Tony Miller's mounting frustration had led to increasingly careless handling of components, resulting in dropped bolts and minor mistakes that required correction. "This is becoming less competitive than I expected," Lauren observed to Dr. Bennett. "Rogers seems to be in a different category entirely. It's raising interesting questions about the nature of expertise itself," the professor replied. "We assume that complex assembly requires constant reference to specifications and procedures, but Rogers appears to have internalized that information to a degree that makes external references unnecessary." During a brief break, when participants were allowed water and restroom visits, Amy approached her father with quiet encouragement. "You're doing amazingly well. How are you feeling?" "Confident," Daniel replied, accepting the bottle of water she offered. "Everything's going according to plan so far." Tony seems frustrated. Tony's discovering that talking about engines and actually rebuilding them are different skills. Sal joined them, his weathered face showing pride mixed with amazement. "Danny, I've worked with you for 30 years, but I've never seen anything like this. You're making this look easy." "It is easy when you know what you're doing. That's just it. How do you know all this? I mean, I understand experience, but this is like you've got the factory manual memorized." Daniel met his old friend's curious gaze, recognizing that his performance was raising questions he'd hoped to avoid. "Some things stick in your memory better than others." Before Sal could pursue the topic further, Dr. Bennett called for the competition to resume. Daniel returned to his workstation, feeling the weight of increased scrutiny from spectators who were beginning to recognize they were witnessing something unusual. The afternoon session began with carburetor adjustment and ignition system installation. Daniel's enhanced memory provided perfect recall of spark plug gap specifications, point gap settings, and timing requirements. He worked with mechanical precision that seemed almost automatic, each movement economical and purposeful. "He's not even checking his work," Rick Caldwell muttered, frustration creeping into his voice as he watched Daniel's steady progress. "Maybe he doesn't need to," Jake Morrison replied, his tone mixing respect with bewilderment. Tony Miller had begun making increasingly critical comments about Daniel's techniques, suggesting that speed was being prioritized over quality. However, Dr. Bennett's periodic inspections confirmed that Daniel's work met or exceeded professional standards for precision and completeness. "Mr. Miller," the professor said during one such exchange, "I'd be happy to discuss assembly quality after everyone has finished. For now, please concentrate on your own work." The crowd had grown throughout the day as word spread through Oakwood about the remarkable competition taking place at the college. Local mechanics, auto enthusiasts, and curious residents lined the shop's perimeter, creating an atmosphere of heightened anticipation. Amy found herself serving as unofficial spokesperson for spectators who wanted to understand what they were witnessing. "My dad's always been exceptional with engines," she explained to a group of college students. "He can diagnose problems just by listening to them run." "But this is different," one student observed. "He's working like he's got X-ray vision or something. Like he can see inside the engine before he puts it together." Amy smiled at the inadvertently accurate observation. "He's got an exceptional memory for technical details." As the afternoon progressed, Daniel moved into the final phases of assembly with unwavering confidence. Exhaust manifold installation, accessory mounting, and final system connections proceeded with the same methodical precision he'd maintained throughout the day. The growing crowd and media attention had transformed what began as a local challenge into something approaching a spectacle. Lauren Parker's photographer had captured hundreds of images documenting not just the technical work, but the human drama of competition under pressure. "This story's writing itself," Lauren told Dr. Bennett during a quiet moment. "Rogers isn't just competing. He's demonstrating capabilities that challenge assumptions about human memory and technical expertise. The implications for technical education are significant," the professor agreed. "If this level of internalized knowledge is achievable, it suggests we may be underestimating the potential for experiential learning." By 4 o'clock, Daniel was approaching completion, while his competitors still faced hours of remaining work. The gap had widened throughout the day, making the outcome increasingly inevitable, barring some unexpected reversal. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Bennett announced to the crowd, "we appear to be witnessing something quite remarkable here today." By 5 o'clock, the community college automotive shop had taken on the atmosphere of a major sporting event. Word had spread beyond Oakwood's borders, drawing mechanics and automotive enthusiasts from surrounding counties who came to witness what local radio had begun calling the most remarkable display of mechanical memory in Kentucky history. Daniel was installing the final accessories when a commotion near the shop entrance drew everyone's attention. A convoy of 3 black SUVs had pulled into the parking lot, their polished surfaces and tinted windows suggesting occupants of considerable means. The vehicle's arrival created a buzz of speculation among spectators who recognized expensive transportation when they saw it. From the lead SUV emerged a distinguished man in his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed incongruous with the industrial setting. He moved with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command, followed by 2 younger associates who carried themselves with professional alertness. "That's Gregory Allen," Lauren Parker whispered to Dr. Bennett, her journalist's instincts immediately recognizing the significance of this arrival. "He owns one of the largest private automotive collections in the country." Dr. Bennett's eyebrows rose with surprise. "The Gregory Allen, what's he doing here?" "Probably the same thing we all are, watching something extraordinary happen." Gregory Allen entered the shop with quiet authority, his presence causing a subtle shift in the room's energy. Conversations quieted as people recognized that someone of obvious importance had joined their gathering. His eyes immediately found Daniel, studying the nearly completed engine with the appraising gaze of an expert. Daniel was aware of the new arrival, but refused to let it disturb his concentration. He was installing the alternator mounting bracket, a task that required precise alignment and proper belt tension. The enhanced memory that had guided him throughout the day provided exact specifications for mounting bolt torque and pulley alignment. Remarkable work, Gregory Allen said quietly to Dr. Bennett as they observed Daniel's methodical progress. I've been following reports of this competition through automotive industry contacts. The description of memory-based assembly seemed too extraordinary to believe. What convinced you to make the drive from Louisville? I've spent 40 years collecting and restoring vintage automobiles. In that time, I've worked with hundreds of mechanics, technicians, and restoration specialists. What I'm observing here represents capabilities I've never encountered. Amy approached the visitor with the polite curiosity that Grace had taught her to show towards strangers. Are you interested in classic cars, sir? Gregory Allen's expression softened as he turned to address her. Very much so. I maintain a collection of vintage American automobiles, and I'm always interested in meeting people who understand these machines at a fundamental level. That would be my father. He's been working on engines since before I was born. So I can see his technique is quite remarkable. Daniel had progressed to the ignition system installation, a critical phase that would determine whether his memory-based assembly could actually function as intended. The distributor required precise positioning relative to the crankshaft, while plug wires needed correct routing to prevent crossfire and interference. Rick Caldwell, still working on his intake manifold installation, looked up to watch Daniel's ignition timing procedure with professional interest. How's he setting the timing without a light? Experience, Sal replied, though even he seemed uncertain about the exact methods Daniel was employing. Daniel was actually using his enhanced memory to visualize the optimal distributor position based on the crankshaft's current orientation. His mental database included precise timing specifications for the 428 Cobra jet under various operating conditions, allowing him to establish initial timing that would be very close to optimal. Tony Miller had fallen significantly behind them. Other participants, his earlier confidence replaced by visible frustration as simple tasks became increasingly difficult. Several components required disassembly and reinstallation after initial mistakes, creating a cascade of delays that widened the gap between his progress and the leaders. Maybe I should just focus on my own work instead of watching the competition, Tony muttered, loud enough for spectators to hear his growing irritation. That might be wise, Dr. Bennett replied diplomatically, though his attention remained fixed on Daniel's approaching completion. Jake Morrison had made steady progress throughout the day, producing quality work that demonstrated solid technical competence. However, his methodical approach meant he was still several hours away from completion, making him a distant third in the informal race toward finishing. Mr. Rogers, Dr. Bennett called out as Daniel began connecting the final electrical systems. Would you estimate your completion time? Daniel paused to assess his remaining tasks: final belt installation, fluid connections, and system checks. Approximately 30 minutes for assembly completion, plus whatever testing procedures you require. A murmur of amazement rippled through the crowd. Daniel had maintained his estimated timeline throughout the day, suggesting either remarkable accuracy in self-assessment or confidence bordering on arrogance. Gregory Allen moved closer to the work area, his expert eye examining the quality of Daniel's assembly from multiple angles. What he observed clearly impressed him. Every component properly positioned, all connections secure, workmanship that met or exceeded professional restoration standards. Dr. Bennett, Gregory Allen said quietly, would it be possible to arrange a brief conversation with Mr. Rogers after the competition concludes? I'm sure he'd be amenable to that, though he may be somewhat overwhelmed by the attention this has generated. Amy overheard the exchange and approached Gregory Allen with protective concern. Sir, my father's had a very long day. If you're planning to interview him for some article or documentation, I'd appreciate knowing your intentions. Gregory Allen smiled at her direct approach. Nothing that formal, Miss Rogers. I'm simply interested in meeting someone with such exceptional abilities. Perhaps discussing some business opportunities that might interest him. What kind of business? Opportunities? I maintain a restoration facility for vintage automobiles that requires individuals with very specialized knowledge. Your father's demonstrated capabilities suggest he might find such work interesting. Amy felt a surge of excitement mixed with caution. After years of financial struggle, genuine opportunities seemed too good to be true. I'll mention it to him, but he'll want to focus on completing this competition first. Of course, professional. Focus is one of the qualities I find most impressive about his performance today. Daniel was installing the final drive belt when Dr. Bennett approached with his clipboard and measuring instruments. Mr. Rogers, I'd like to perform some preliminary inspections while you complete the assembly, if that's acceptable. Go ahead, Doctor. Bennett began checking torque specifications on accessible bolts, finding each one precisely set to factory requirements. He verified electrical connections, examined gasket sealing, and assessed overall assembly quality with growing amazement at the consistently professional results. How are you determining proper torque values without specification references? Dr. Bennett asked as he checked a cylinder head bolt. Experience teaches you to feel proper tension. Over-torquing strips threads or warps surfaces. Under-torquing causes leaks or failures. You develop sensitivity to the right amount of force, but these are precisely set to factory specifications. Daniel met the professor's curious gaze. Some engines are more forgiving than others. High-performance power plants like this require exact specifications to function properly. Dr. Bennett made notes while continuing his inspection. Every measurement confirmed that Daniel's memory-based assembly achieved accuracy that typically required constant reference to technical documentation. This is quite remarkable, Mr. Rogers. In 20 years of teaching automotive technology, I've never observed assembly of this quality achieved without reference materials. Thank you. Lauren Parker was documenting the final phases with detailed notes and photography, recognizing that she was witnessing something that would resonate. Far beyond automotive circles, the story of a small-town mechanic achieving the seemingly impossible through pure memory had elements that would appeal to anyone interested in human potential and traditional craftsmanship. As Daniel installed the final components, the crowd pressed closer to witness the completion of what had begun as a local challenge and evolved into something approaching legend. The shop fell silent, except for the subtle sounds of final adjustments and system connections. Tony Miller had conceded defeat around 4:30, his frustration finally overcoming his stubborn determination to continue. He stood apart from the crowd, his earlier bravado replaced by grudging respect for Daniel's abilities. Rick Caldwell continued working methodically on his own assembly, having abandoned any hope of matching Daniel's pace, but determined to complete the challenge successfully. Jake Morrison had reached the valve train installation phase, still hours away from completion, but producing quality work that demonstrated solid professional competence. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Bennett announced as Daniel stepped back from his completed engine, Mr. Rogers has finished his assembly. We'll now perform comprehensive testing to verify functionality and accuracy. The crowd erupted in applause that seemed to surprise Daniel with its enthusiasm. He'd approached the competition as a personal challenge and financial opportunity, not expecting the emotional investment that the community had developed in his success. Amy pushed through the crowd to embrace her father, tears of pride streaming down her face. "Dad, that was incredible. You actually did it." "Still need to pass inspection," Daniel replied, though his voice carried quiet satisfaction with his performance. Gregory Allen approached as the crowd began to disperse, his expression serious but pleased. "Mr. Rogers, congratulations on a remarkable achievement. When you have a moment, I'd very much like to discuss some opportunities that might interest you." Daniel looked at the distinguished stranger, noting the expensive suit and confident bearing that suggested significant resources. "What kind of opportunities?" "The kind that recognize exceptional talent and compensate it appropriately. Perhaps we could speak privately after Dr. Bennett completes his evaluation." Sal appeared at Daniel's shoulder, protective instincts engaged. By the stranger's obvious wealth and interest in his protege. "Danny's had a long day, mister. Maybe this conversation could wait until tomorrow." "Of course. I'm staying at the Oakwood Inn tonight. Perhaps breakfast tomorrow would be convenient?" Daniel studied Gregory Allen's face, seeing genuine interest, rather than the casual curiosity that had motivated other inquiries throughout the day. "I'll consider it." "Excellent. Dr. Bennett has my contact information if you decide to join me." As Gregory Allen departed with his associates, Dr. Bennett began the comprehensive testing that would determine whether Daniel's memory-based assembly could actually function as intended. The first test involved checking compression across all 8 cylinders, a critical measurement that would reveal whether internal components were properly installed and sealed. "Compression readings are excellent," Dr. Bennett announced after completing his measurements, "consistent across all cylinders and within factory specifications." The crowd cheered this confirmation that Daniel's work was not just visually impressive, but mechanically sound. Additional tests followed: oil pressure verification, electrical system functionality, fuel system integrity, and timing accuracy. Each measurement confirmed professional quality assembly that met or exceeded factory standards. "Mr. Rogers," Dr. Bennett said formally as he completed his evaluation, "I'm pleased to announce that your engine assembly is complete, accurate, and ready for operation. Congratulations on achieving something truly extraordinary." The final applause was sustained and heartfelt, recognition from a community that had witnessed something they would remember for years to come. Daniel stood beside his completed engine, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction, relief, and anticipation about what this achievement might mean for his and Amy's future. The celebration that followed Dr. Bennett's official confirmation transformed the community college automotive shop into something resembling a town festival. Local residents who had gathered throughout the day to witness the competition now lingered to congratulate Daniel and discuss what they'd observed. Many seemed reluctant to leave, as if departing would somehow diminish the significance of what had transpired. Carol Henderson arrived with coffee and sandwiches from her diner, refusing payment despite Daniel's protests. "This is the most exciting thing that's happened in Oakwood since the state championship football team in 1987, she declared, setting up an impromptu refreshment station. "Least I can do is feed the man who put our town on the map." Dr. Bennett was fielding phone calls from automotive journalists and trade publications who had received word about the competition's outcome. His academic credentials lent credibility to reports that might otherwise seem exaggerated, and his detailed documentation provided verification for skeptical editors. "Yes, complete assembly from memory alone," Dr. Bennett was explaining to a caller from Motor Trend magazine. "No reference materials, no consultation, no computer assistance, just exceptional mechanical knowledge applied with remarkable precision." Daniel found himself surrounded by well-wishers who wanted to shake hands and offer congratulations. The attention felt overwhelming after years of working in relative anonymity, but Amy's presence at his side helped him navigate the social requirements with grace. "Mr. Rogers," one of Dr. Bennett's students approached hesitantly, "could I ask you about the sequence you used for installing the pistons? In class, we always start with number 1 cylinder, but you seem to follow a different pattern." Daniel appreciated the technical question, which felt more comfortable than the general praise he'd been receiving. I install them in the order that minimizes crankshaft rotation, reduces wear on the main bearings, and makes assembly more efficient. That's brilliant. Why don't they teach that method in school? Schools teach safe, standardized procedures that work for everyone. Experience teaches you shortcuts that work when you understand the underlying principles. Sal had been watching these interactions with growing pride and concern. He'd known Daniel was exceptionally skilled, but the level of recognition he was receiving suggested capabilities that transcended normal professional competence. "Danny," Sal said quietly during a brief lull in the congratulations, "we need to talk about what this means for the shop. Word's going to spread about today, and we're going to get attention we've never dealt with before. Good attention, I hope. Probably. But also pressure. People are going to expect miracles from now on. Every difficult job that comes through the door, they're going to wonder why you can't fix it instantly, like you did today." Daniel hadn't considered this aspect of his public demonstration. Success often created expectations that were difficult to manage, particularly when that success seemed to exceed normal human capabilities. "We'll handle it like we always have. One job at a time, doing our best work." This wasn't your best work, Danny. This was something else entirely, something that's going to change how people see you whether you want it to or not. Lauren Parker had spent the evening interviewing spectators and participants, gathering perspectives that would provide context for her article. The consistent theme in every conversation was amazement at witnessing abilities that challenged assumptions about human memory and technical expertise. "I've covered automotive events for 15 years, she told Dr. Bennett as they reviewed her notes, "but I've never seen anything comparable to this." Rogers didn't just win a competition, he demonstrated capabilities that seem almost superhuman. The memory aspect is certainly exceptional, but I think the more significant factor is his intuitive understanding of mechanical systems. He approaches problems differently than conventionally trained technicians. How so? Academic training teaches systematic analysis, identify symptoms, develop hypotheses, test solutions methodically. Rogers seems to perceive problems holistically, understanding entire systems rather than individual components. Lauren made notes about this observation, recognizing it as insight that would help readers understand the broader implications of Daniel's achievement. "Do you think his approach could be taught to other mechanics? The memory component probably can't be replicated, but the systems thinking might be developable. That's something I'd like to explore in future research." As evening approached, the crowd began to disperse naturally. Rick Caldwell and Jake Morrison had both completed their assemblies successfully, though several hours after Daniel's finish. Their engines passed Dr. Bennett's inspections with minor corrections, confirming that the challenge was difficult but achievable for experienced mechanics with sufficient time and patience. Tony Miller had departed earlier without participating in the celebrations. His earlier bravado replaced by quiet recognition that he'd significantly underestimated both the challenge's complexity and Daniel's capabilities. Several spectators mentioned seeing him examining Daniel's completed engine with professional interest before leaving. "He'll be back," Sal predicted when someone mentioned Tony's early departure. "Pride's going to eat at him until he figures out a way to save face." "Let him save face," Daniel replied. "This was never about embarrassing anyone. Maybe not for you, but that was definitely his plan for you." As the shop emptied, Dr. Bennett approached Daniel with the competition's prize money and official documentation of his victory. The $4,200 pot represented more money than Daniel typically earned in 2 months, a financial windfall that would significantly impact his and Amy's situation. "Mr. Rogers, it's been a privilege to witness and document today's achievement. I hope you'll consider guest lecturing in my program sometime soon. I'd be honored, though I'm not sure what I could teach your students that you can't. You could teach them that excellence requires more than following procedures. That true expertise comes from understanding why those procedures exist and when they might need modification. Amy had been quietly calculating the prize money's impact on their finances, and her relief was visible when Dr. Bennett handed over the envelope containing their winnings. Medical school tuition would remain challenging, but this competition had eliminated their most immediate financial pressures. Dad, we should celebrate properly. Dinner somewhere nicer than the kitchen table. Good idea. Where would you like to go? Somewhere we can talk privately about Mr. Allen's offer, because I think we both know you're going to meet with him tomorrow. Daniel considered his daughter's perceptive observation. Gregory Allen's interest seemed genuine, and the timing was remarkable. Just when they needed opportunities, someone with resources had appeared to recognize his abilities. You think I should hear what he has to say? I think you'd regret not hearing what he has to say. This kind of recognition doesn't happen often. They drove to a family restaurant on the highway, a step up from their usual dining options, but still within their comfort zone. The quiet booth in the back provided privacy for the conversation they both knew was necessary. Tell me honestly, Amy said after they'd ordered, how long have you been able to do what you did today? Daniel had expected this question, but still found it difficult to answer completely. The enhanced memory developed gradually after your mother's accident. At first, it was just medical information I was trying to understand. Then, it expanded to technical manuals and specifications. But when did you realize you could rebuild an entire engine from memory? I've been testing myself privately for about 2 years, visualizing assembly sequences, checking my mental blueprints against actual engines I was working on. But I'd never attempted anything this complex in public. Amy studied her father's face, seeing the weight of carrying such capabilities in isolation. Why didn't you tell me? Or Sal? Why keep it secret? Because it felt wrong to benefit from something that came from losing your mother, like I was profiting from tragedy. Dad, that's not how it works. Mum's death didn't give you this ability. It revealed something that was already there. Your mind found a way to cope with trauma by becoming more capable, not less. Daniel felt tears threatening as Amy articulated what he'd been unable to accept for years. I still miss her every day. I know. But she'd want you to use every advantage you have to build the best possible life for yourself and for me. That's what love means. Wanting someone to succeed even when you can't be there to help them. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their meals, but the emotional foundation had been established for whatever decisions lay ahead. So what do you think Mr. Allen wants? Amy asked as they ate. Based on his comments about restoration work, probably a job offer. Someone with his resources likely has access to rare automobiles that require specialized knowledge. Would you be interested in that kind of work? Daniel considered the question seriously. It would be a chance to work on vehicles I'd never encounter otherwise. Learn about automotive history, help preserve important machines for future generations. Sounds like you're already interested. I am, but I'm also concerned about leaving Sal in the shop. He's been like a father to me since I was 18. Amy smiled at her father's loyalty, one of the qualities she most admired about him. Have you considered that Mr. Allen might be interested in more than just hiring you? Maybe he sees potential for some kind of partnership or facility development. That seems optimistic. Today seemed impossible yesterday. Maybe optimistic is exactly what we need to be. As they finished dinner and prepared to return home, Daniel felt a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. The competition had demonstrated his capabilities publicly, validating abilities he'd kept hidden while creating opportunities he couldn't have imagined. Whatever Mr. Allen proposes tomorrow, remember that you've already accomplished something. "Remarkable today," Amy said as they walked to the truck. "You proved that exceptional ability still matters, that experience and dedication can achieve things that seem impossible." "We proved it," Daniel corrected. "Your encouragement made this possible. Your talent made it possible. I just helped you believe in it." The drive home was quiet but comfortable, both of them processing the day's events and anticipating tomorrow's possibilities. Oakwood's familiar streets looked the same as always, but Daniel knew that his relationship with his hometown had changed. Permanently. He was no longer just another struggling mechanic. He was the man who had achieved the impossible through pure memory and skill. As they climbed the stairs to their apartment, Amy turned to her father with one final observation. "You know what the best part of today was?" "What?" "Watching you realize how exceptional you really are. You've been hiding your light under a bushel for years, and today you finally let it shine." Daniel smiled at his daughter's wisdom, recognizing that she'd inherited not just Grace's intelligence, but also her ability to see potential in people they loved. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Tomorrow's going to be the beginning of something wonderful. I can feel it. Sunday morning dawned with crisp autumn air that carried the promise of change through Oakwood's quiet streets. Daniel had slept better than he had in months, the weight of financial worry temporarily lifted by yesterday's prize money and the prospect of even greater opportunities ahead. He dressed carefully for his breakfast meeting with Gregory Allen, selecting his best shirt and the tie Amy had given him for Father's Day. Amy was already in the kitchen when he emerged, having prepared coffee and toast with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing household responsibilities since her mother's death. "Nervous?" she asked, studying his face with the perceptive attention that never failed to amaze him. "Cautiously optimistic," Daniel replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Yesterday taught me that sometimes extraordinary things are possible. Just remember that Mr. Allen sought you out, not the other way around. Whatever he's proposing, he needs your abilities more than you need his offer." The wisdom in Amy's observation struck Daniel as profound for someone barely out of her teens. She'd developed remarkable insight into human nature and negotiation. Dynamics, skills that would serve her well in medical school and beyond. Any advice for handling wealthy businessmen? Be yourself. The same qualities that impressed everyone yesterday will impress him too. Don't try to be something you're not. Daniel arrived at the Oakwood Inn 15 minutes early, wanting to observe Gregory Allen's demeanor before their formal conversation began. The hotel's restaurant was modest by city standards, but represented the finest dining establishment in their small town. Through the windows, he could see Allen already seated at a corner table, reviewing documents while sipping coffee. When Daniel entered, Allen stood immediately and extended his hand with the firm grip of someone accustomed to important business. "Mr. Rogers, thank you for joining me. I trust you slept well after yesterday's remarkable achievement." "Very well, thank you. And congratulations seem appropriate for you as well. I understand you traveled quite a distance to witness the min competition." Allen's smile suggested appreciation for Daniel's directness. "Indeed I did. When my sources described what was happening here, I knew I had to see it personally. Extraordinary talent deserves personal attention." They settled at the table with fresh coffee and menus, though Allen seemed more interested in conversation than breakfast. His manner was professional but warm, suggesting someone comfortable with making significant decisions based on personal assessment rather than formal credentials. "Mr. Rogers, before we discuss specifics, I'd like to understand something about yesterday's performance. Have you always possessed that level of memory capability, or did it develop over time?" Daniel had anticipated this question but still found it challenging to answer completely. "It developed following a personal tragedy about 5 years ago. My enhanced memory seems to be my mind's way of processing and retaining technical information with unusual precision. A coping mechanism that became an extraordinary asset. Something like that. Alan made notes in a leather portfolio, his questions, suggesting someone who understood both the practical and psychological aspects of exceptional ability. Have you ever considered applying your capabilities in a professional context beyond local automotive repair? Until yesterday, I wasn't entirely certain they could be applied successfully under pressure. The competition was my first public demonstration, a remarkably successful debut, which brings me to why I'm here. Alan opened his portfolio and extracted several photographs of pristine vintage automobiles in various stages of restoration. Each image showed vehicles that represented the pinnacle of automotive history. A 1936 Auburn Speedster, a 1953 Corvette prototype, a 1969 Boss 429 Mustang, and dozens of other machines that collectors would consider priceless. This is a small sampling of my collection, Mr. Rogers. Over 400 vehicles spanning 90 years of automotive development. Each one requires specialized knowledge for proper maintenance and restoration. Daniel examined the photographs with growing appreciation for the scope of Alan's holdings. These weren't just expensive cars, they were rolling museums representing pivotal moments in transportation history. Impressive collection. These vehicles must require exceptional care. They do, which is why I employ a team of the most skilled restoration specialists I can find. However, I've been searching for someone with capabilities that go beyond conventional expertise. Alan produced additional documents outlining his facility's operations. The Sterling Automotive Museum occupied a 40-acre campus outside Louisville, featuring climate-controlled storage, a complete machine shop, a research library, and restoration. Bays equipped with the finest available equipment. What kind of position are you considering? Daniel asked, though his excitement was building as he absorbed the scope of Alan's operation. Director of Technical Operations. You would oversee all restoration projects, authenticate vehicles and components, and serve as my primary advisor. On acquisition decisions, the role would utilize your memory capabilities while allowing you to work with automotive history that most people only see in museums. The title and responsibilities exceeded anything Daniel had imagined possible. That sounds like a position requiring extensive formal education and credentials. Formal education teaches theory, Mr. Rogers. What I witnessed yesterday was practical mastery that can't be learned in classrooms. I need someone who can look at a 1932 Duesenberg and know immediately whether it's authentic, properly restored, or significantly modified. Alan opened another folder containing salary and benefit information that made Daniel's breath catch. The base compensation was more than triple his current income, with performance bonuses that could double even that generous figure. Health, insurance, retirement contributions, and educational benefits for family members were included as standard components. This is quite generous, Daniel managed, though the numbers seemed almost fictional compared to his current financial reality. Exceptional talent deserves exceptional compensation. I've learned that investing in the right people yields returns that far exceed their cost. What about location? I assume you'd want me to relocate to Louisville? Alan's expression suggested he'd anticipated this concern. Actually, I've been considering expanding operations to include satellite facilities in strategic locations. Oakwood's central position relative to major automotive manufacturing centers makes it an ideal candidate for such development. The implications struck Daniel immediately. You're talking about establishing a facility here? A restoration center. focusing on American muscle cars and classics from the 1950s through 1970s. Your reputation after yesterday's demonstration would attract clients from across the region. Daniel felt his mind racing as he processed the possibilities. What about my current obligations? I've worked for Sal Benedetto for over 30 years. Mr. Benedetto is welcome to participate in the new venture as facilities manager. His business, experience, and local connections would be valuable assets. Alan had clearly researched Daniel's situation thoroughly, understanding that loyalty and community connections were important factors in any decision. You've thought this through comprehensively. I don't make offers of this magnitude without extensive consideration. What I witnessed yesterday convinced me that you represent exactly the kind of expertise I've been seeking. Their breakfast had arrived during the conversation, but neither man seemed particularly interested in eating. The discussion had taken on the intensity of a negotiation that could transform multiple lives. There's one other consideration, Alan continued, producing a final document. Educational support for your daughter. The Sterling Foundation provides full scholarships for family members pursuing medical, engineering, or related technical degrees. Daniel stared at the scholarship information, calculating that it would cover not just Amy's remaining undergraduate expenses, but her entire medical school education. The financial relief would be transformational, eliminating the worry that had driven him to accept yesterday's risky challenge. Mr. Allen, this is far more generous than I expected. Why are you willing to invest so significantly in someone you met yesterday? Because yesterday's demonstration revealed capabilities that are genuinely rare. In 40 years of collecting and restoring vintage automobiles, I've never encountered someone with your combination of technical knowledge and perfect recall. Alan leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more personal. Mr. Rogers, I'm 62 years old. I've built a successful business and accumulated a remarkable collection of automotive history. But collections are meaningless without people who understand and preserve them properly. You're looking for someone to continue your legacy. I'm looking for someone who shares my passion for mechanical excellence and historical preservation. Yesterday's performance suggested you might be that person. Daniel felt the weight of decision settling around him. The offer represented everything he'd hoped for. Financial security, professional recognition, and opportunities that would honor both his abilities and his commitment to craftsmanship. I'd need to discuss this with my daughter and with Sal before making any final decisions. Of course, take whatever time you need. This kind of opportunity requires careful consideration. Alan handed Daniel his business card, along with a comprehensive information packet about the Sterling operation. My private number is on the card. Call me when you've reached a decision, regardless of what that decision might be. As they prepared to leave, Alan offered one final observation. Mr. Rogers, talent like yours doesn't appear often. When it does, it deserves to be recognized and utilized fully. Don't let false modesty or fear of change prevent you from achieving what you're capable of. Daniel returned to the apartment, to find Amy waiting with barely contained excitement. How did it go? What did he offer? Is it good news? It's remarkable news, Daniel replied, spreading Alan's materials across the kitchen table. But it's also life-changing in ways that require serious thought. For the next hour, Daniel explained Alan's proposal in detail, while Amy examined the facility photographs and financial information. Her excitement grew as she absorbed the implications, but she also recognized the magnitude of the decision they were facing. Dad, this is everything we've dreamed about: financial security, professional recognition, educational opportunities. How could you possibly say no? I'm not planning to say no, but I need to make sure we're making this decision for the right reasons, with full understanding of what it means. Amy studied the scholarship information with tears forming in her eyes. Medical school without debt, the freedom to pursue specialization without worrying about loans. Dad, this changes everything. It does, which is why we need to be certain we're ready for that level of change. They were interrupted by Sal's arrival, his weathered face showing concern mixed with curiosity. Danny, I heard you were meeting with that fancy collector this morning. How'd it go? Daniel invited his longtime mentor to join them at the table, then spent another hour explaining Alan's comprehensive proposal. Sal listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or making notes as he processed the information. Well, Sal said finally, I've got to admit, this is bigger than anything I ever imagined possible. What do you think I should do? Sal considered the question with the deliberation of someone who understood both the opportunity and the risks involved. Danny, in 30+ years, I've watched you grow from a confused kid into one of the finest mechanics I've ever known. This offer recognizes what you really are, but nothing. This is your chance to show the world what I've known all along, that you're special. Don't let loyalty to an old man and a struggling garage hold you back from something extraordinary. Amy reached across the table to take both men's hands. We're family, all of us. Whatever decision we make together. Daniel felt the truth of her words settling into his heart. The choice wasn't between loyalty and opportunity. It was about finding a way to honor both while building a future worthy of Grace's memory and Amy's potential. I think, Daniel said slowly, it's time to call Mr. Allen and accept his offer. The phone call that followed was brief and professional, with Allen expressing satisfaction at Daniel's decision and promising to begin facility development immediately. By Christmas, Oakwood would have a world-class automotive restoration center that would transform the town's economic prospects while providing Daniel with the platform his abilities deserved. As evening settled over their apartment, Daniel and Amy sat together reviewing the materials that would guide their transition into an extraordinary new chapter. The competition that had begun as a desperate gamble for tuition money had evolved into something far greater: validation of hidden talent, recognition of exceptional ability, and proof that sometimes the most remarkable opportunities emerge from life's most challenging moments. Mom would be proud, Amy said softly, echoing thoughts they'd both been carrying throughout the day. She would, Daniel agreed, and she'd probably remind us that this is just the beginning. Outside, Oakwood's familiar streets stretched into the darkness, soon to be transformed by changes that none of them could have imagined just 2 days earlier. But inside their modest apartment, a father and daughter looked toward a future bright with possibility, knowing that courage and talent, combined with unexpected opportunity, had created something truly extraordinary. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.